20 best 1960s muscle cars. Alright folks, let's talk about the real ground pounders of the 1960s. Not just the pretty faces you saw on every magazine cover, but the machines that truly defined an era of horsepower. We're peeling back the years to look at the legends that left more than just rubber on the pavement, they left a mark on our souls. 1966, Chrysler Street Hemi. By 1966, Chrysler figured it was time to stop teasing and unleash the beast. Their 426 Hemi, a purebred racing engine, was about to hit the streets. Up till then, if you wanted a Hemi, you pretty much had to own a race team. But NASCAR, bless their hearts, kind of forced Chrysler's hand. See, back in '64, Richard Petty in his Hemi Plymouth was making everyone else look like they were standing still. That engine was so dominant, NASCAR actually banned it for '65. They told Chrysler, if you want to race it, you got to sell it to the public. So, Chrysler said, you got it. In '66, any fella with the green and the guts could walk into a Dodge or Plymouth showroom and order an intermediate with that legendary 426 Hemi shoehorned under the hood. This wasn't some warmed-over street motor, mind you. This was a dual-quad, 425 horsepower monster, born and bred on the high banks. Now, taming a race engine for everyday driving ain't easy. Chrysler's engineers burned the midnight oil, making it durable, making it reliable, even if you lived up in the mountains or drove it in a snowstorm. And what's really something is, even as engine tech kept changing through the late '60s, that Street Hemi hardly changed a bit. Didn't need to. It was already a legend. For many of us old gearheads, the first time you heard that Hemi rumble, well, that's a sound you never forget. 1962 Pontiac Catalina and Grand Prix Super Duty. 421. Now, way back in '62, we weren't exactly calling them muscle cars yet, not by a long shot. But if you were around then, you knew something special was brewing. You had these big, beautiful full-sizers, your Ford Galaxies, your Chevy Impalas, even those classy Chrysler 300s, and they were all duking it out on the drag strips and the high banks. And Pontiac? Oh, they were right in the thick of it, throwing some serious punches. This was before the killjoys at the American Manufacturers Association dropped the hammer with their racing ban in '63. Pontiac was absolutely on fire, and their big secret was a whole family of Super Duty engines. These things weren't just turning heads, they were rewriting the rulebook. The king of that hill was the 421 cubic inch Super Duty V8. They said it made 405 horses, but if you drove one, you knew it was more. Come March of '62, they made it even meaner with bigger valves and an intake that let it breathe deeper. More air, more fuel, more go. But Pontiac wasn't just about brute force. They got smart. They took their big Catalina and Grand Prix, stripped them down aluminum for the hood, fenders, bumpers, you name it. Lighter car, same big engine? You do the math. Suddenly, these land yachts were moving like they were scalded. They didn't build many, fewer than 200 of those Super Duty Pontiacs, but the message was loud and clear. The horsepower age wasn't just coming. It had arrived, and Pontiac was leading the parade. '63 Plymouth Max Wedge. If you spent any time hanging around garages or drag strips in the early '60s, you probably remember when Chrysler decided to go left when everyone else was going right. GM was still all about those big, full-size cruisers, but Chrysler? They took a gamble in '62 and went smaller, well, smaller in car size, definitely not in the engine department. They junked their original full-size plans practically at the last minute and squeezed Virgil Exner's pretty wild styling onto a more compact frame. Now, some folks said they looked a little quirky. And yeah, maybe a bit odd. But what those cars looked like didn't matter for too long, because Chrysler was about to unleash some serious fury under the hood. With Elwood Engel brought in to tidy up the design, the engineers, led by the man, the myth, the legend Tom Hoover, got busy. The result was the Max Wedge. The 413 cubic inch version hit the streets in '62, called the Superstock 413 in a Plymouth, and the Ramcharger 413 in a Dodge. Didn't matter the nameplate, they were just plain fast. But 1963, that's when things got really serious. The Max Wedge grew to 426 cubic inches, spitting out 425 horsepower, and they hooked it up to the industry's first 3-speed automatic transmission that could handle that kind of power. You put that engine in one of their lightweight B-body cars, and you had yourself a missile with a license plate. These things weren't just quick, they were nearly untouchable at the track. They only made about 250 of these Plymouth Max Wedge beasts in '63. So if you see one today, you're looking at something rarer than hen's teeth. '64 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. By '63, the fight to be king of the drag strip in NASCAR was a full-blown war, and most of the big guns were still betting on their full-size cars. For Ford, that meant the big old Galaxy 500. It had plenty of grunt, no doubt, especially with that new 427 cubic inch FE big block. But it was a heavy car, and heavy just doesn't win races. So Ford did something pretty radical. In 1964, they took their mid-size Fairlane car that had only been out for a couple of years and turned it into an absolute fire-breathing monster. They called it the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. Just the name sounded fast, and boy, did it deliver. Under that hood, the same brute 427 Scythe engine, tweaked to make 425 horsepower at a screaming 6,000 RPM. But the real magic wasn't just the power, it was how light they made it. Ford went nuts with fiberglass hood, fenders, doors, even the bumpers. Real glass windows? Nope, replaced with plexiglass on the sides and back. Ford only built 100 of these Thunderbolts, 49 with 4 speeds and 51 with automatics. These weren't daily drivers, folks. These were purpose-built drag strip assassins. And they owned the strip, winning the 1964 NHRA Superstock Championship. NASCAR might have told them no thanks, but in drag racing, the Thunderbolt struck like lightning. And when Chrysler's Hemi got kicked out of NASCAR in '65, Ford finally had its day in the stock car sun. '65 Pontiac GTO Tri-Power. Oh boy, 1964. That was the year the muscle car truly grabbed America by the collar. Pontiac blessed their sneaky hearts, found a way around GM's corporate engine size rules, and stuffed a big V8 into their mid-size Le Mans. They called it the GTO. It started as just an option package, but what a package. Back then, GM had this rule: no engines bigger than 330 cubic inches in the intermediates. Pontiac didn't just bend that rule, they snapped it in half by dropping in their 389. It was a gamble, the kind that could get execs fired. But it paid off, big time, and launched a legend. By '65, the GTO wasn't some secret handshake deal, it was a sensation. They made it even better that year: improved brakes, heavy-duty shocks, a beefier sway bar. The base 389 was making 335 horsepower. But the one everybody wanted, the one that made your heart thump, was the Tri-Power. 3 two-barrel carbs working together to make 360 horsepower. The sound when you open those up? Pure American thunder. Sales went through the roof in '65. Over 75,000 of them flew out of dealerships. Pontiac hit a nerve. Folks wanted speed, style, and a bit of rebellion. Any of you lucky enough to own or race one of these beauties back in the day? I'd love to hear those stories. 1968 AMC AMX. Now, if you were around in the late '60s, you remember American Motors. They were the sensible ones building good, honest cars for everyday folks. The car for the human race, that was their line, and they stuck to it. While the big three were chasing the kids with loud pipes and wild stripes, AMC was making cars for sensible families. But here's the funny part. AMC, in a way, helped kick off the whole muscle car thing without even trying. Years before, they were pushing for smaller, more efficient cars. And by doing that, they kind of opened the door for stuffing big engines into smaller bodies, the basic muscle car recipe. Ironically, they were a bit slow to walk through that door themselves. By '68, though, they knew they had to get in the game. And when they did it with style. Out came Dick Teague's beautiful Javelin, and right alongside it, the real showstopper, the AMC AMX. This was a 2-seat muscle coupe, sharp as a tack, aggressive, and priced to move. With a 390 V8 under the hood, putting out some serious ponies, and weighing just a bit over 3,000 pounds, this little Hornet could flat out fly. You got Corvette performance for Mustang money. and it still held on to that AMC tradition of good value. The AMX wasn't just fast, it was smart. It talked to the baby boomers who wanted excitement, but maybe didn't have a Corvette-sized bank account. (1969) Chevrolet Camaro COPO 427. When you're talking 60s muscle, the Camaro always comes up. And if you're talking Camaros, there's one that sits on a mountaintop, the 1969 COPO Camaro. Now, COPO, that stood for Central Office Production Order. Sounds pretty boring, right? Like something for ordering a fleet of beige sedans. And usually it was for police cars, taxi cabs, that sort of thing. But some real sharp dealers, guys like Don Yanko, saw a loophole. What if they used that COPO system to sneak Chevy's biggest, baddest engines into their lightest car, the Camaro? That's exactly what they did. The result was a Camaro with a fire-breathing 427 V8 under the hood, the same engine you'd find in a Vet or a big Impala. Chevy had this internal rule: C, no engines over 400 cubes in the smaller cars like the Camaro. But COPO let M sidestep that rule neat as you please. In '69, you had two main flavors of COPO Camaro. The more common one, COPO 9561, came with the L72 iron block 427. Raw, nasty, and built to make noise. Then there was the Holy Grail, COPO 9560. That bad boy had the ZL1 all-aluminum 427. They only made 69 of those. Light, ridiculously fast, and unbelievably powerful. Dealers like Yanko, Fred Gibb, and Berger became legends by ordering and selling these factory supercars. And get this, at least one of those 69 COPO Camaros came with Chevy's wild V75 liquid tire chain option, a factory-installed sprayer that shot traction goo onto the rear tires. A burnout in a can, straight from GM. (1969) Ford Mustang Boss 429. We all know the Mustang started the whole pony car stampede. But let's be honest, the '69 Boss 429 wasn't just a pony. This was a thoroughbred built for war, plain and simple. The Boss 429 wasn't really meant for cruising down Main Street, USA. It was designed to get Ford's monster 429 shotgun Hemi-style engine homologated for NASCAR. And to do that, they had to sell a certain number to the public. So what did they do? They figured out how to cram that massive engine into a Mustang. Now, that wasn't easy. That 429 was wide. So Ford shipped unfinished Mustangs without engines over to Carcraft in Brighton, Michigan. Those guys had to cut and widen the shock towers, rework the whole front suspension, basically rebuild the front end just to make room for that beast of an engine. On paper, Ford said the Boss 429 made 375 horsepower. But anybody who knew anything about engines knew that was just for the insurance man. With a little tuning, a good set of headers, and the right gears, that thing was a monster. Sure, a 428 Cobra Jet Mustang might have been quicker from stoplight to stoplight right off the showroom floor. But the Boss 9 had legs. It was built for high-speed battle. Ford only made 859 of them in '69, and another 499 in '70. If you saw one back then, you didn't forget it. That wide stance, that giant hood scoop that was actually functional, that unmistakable Boss 429 script on the fender. And under the hood, the heart of a NASCAR warrior. (1969) Dodge Charger Daytona. By the tail end of the 1960s, man, everything was primed for an all-out horsepower brawl. The baby boomers were all grown up with money in their pockets. Gas was dirt cheap. We were shooting for the moon and racing drag strips. NASCAR, you name it, was king. And Dodge decided to go for broke. I mean, really go for it. That's how we got the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. To win in NASCAR, especially on those big super speedways, Dodge had to play by the rules. And the big rule was if you race it on Sunday, you got to sell it on Monday. So Dodge built exactly 503 of the wildest, most outrageous muscle cars anybody had ever seen. This wasn't just another fast car. This was something from another planet. For starters, The Charger Daytona looked like a spaceship. It had that long, pointed nose cone they cooked up in a wind tunnel, and that ridiculous, towering rear wing that looked like it belonged on a fighter jet. People didn't know whether to stare or run for cover. But under all that wild sheet metal was Chrysler's legendary 426 Hemi, a 425 horsepower terror that already had NASCAR officials losing sleep. Dodge had taken the rule book, bent it till it screamed, and built a winner. NASCAR didn't know what hit him. The Daytona wasn't just fast, it was practically unbeatable on the big tracks. Dodge called NASCAR's bluff, sold just enough to make it legal, and changed racing forever. It was Detroit basically saying, we can build anything, and we can make it fly. 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. Riding on GM's trusty mid-size A-body platform, the Chevy Malibu and its hell-raising twin, the Chevelle SS, they were like rocket fuel for the muscle car boom. And by 1970, Chevy wasn't just keeping up in the horsepower race. They dropped an atom bomb. That year, something truly magical happened. If you knew the secret handshake and whispered the right code, RPO, Z15, you got the keys to the kingdom. The 454 cubic inch big block. This monster came in two flavors. The LS5, good for a stout 360 horses, and then there was the LS6. Oh, the LS6. Solid lifters, 11:1 compression, and a factory rating of 450 horsepower, though everyone knew it was making more. That wasn't just a lot of power. It was the most horsepower ever offered in a regular production car up to that point. They only built 4,475 of those LS6 powered Chevelle SS 454s that year. But here's where it gets tricky for collectors. Before '69, the Super Sport was its own model, you could tell by the VIN. After that, SS just became a trim package on the Malibu. So unless you got the original dealer invoice, a window sticker, or maybe a build sheet tucked under the seat, proving it's a real deal SS can be tough. And that little bit of mystery, it just makes the genuine ones even more valuable today. So, what do you think? Did muscle cars hit their peak in the '60s? Or did another decade do it even better? '69 Dodge Charger RT Hemi. The 1969 Dodge Charger RT. Now there was a car that oozed attitude. With those long, aggressive lines and that unmistakable Coke bottle shape, the Charger already looked mean just sitting still. But then you put the almighty 426 Hemi under that long hood, and suddenly you weren't just looking mean, you were mean. This wasn't just some hopped-up V8. This was the Hemi 425 horsepower and a gut-wrenching 490 pound-feet of torque. You didn't just drive a Hemi Charger, you aimed it. And the sound when that thing turned over? Pure, unadulterated American thunder. But Dodge knew it wasn't just about raw power. They beefed up the suspension, threw in a heavy-duty Dana 60 rear end, and a sure grip differential to make sure all that fury actually made it to the pavement. This Charger wasn't just a straight-line screamer. It was a legitimate drag strip warrior. The numbers don't lie. A '69 Hemi Charger RT could blast through the quarter mile in about 13.5 seconds. Back then, that was flying, and it made it one of the baddest cars on any street, anywhere. Even today, that car demands respect. '69 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. Now, when we talk muscle cars, a lot of times bigger is better is the name of the game. But the 1969 Chevy Camaro Z28, that little rascal proved that sometimes it ain't the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. This street brawler came with a high-winding 302 cubic inch V8. Yeah, small compared to the big block monsters, but this thing was a buzzsaw, officially rated at 290 horsepower, but we all knew it was making closer to 350, maybe more. It was born from Chevy's SCCA Trans AM racing program. So that engine loved to rev, was incredibly responsive, and built for carving corners, not just straight lines. It was light, agile, and if you knew how to drive it, a Z28 could give those big Q bullies a real run for their money. With a limited slip diff and a properly sorted suspension, it launched hard and wasn't afraid to dance through the twisties. It had run the quarter in around 13.8 seconds, right there with some much bigger, heavier machines. A giant killer, that's what it was. 1969 Plymouth Roadrunner A12 six-pack. And if you're asking me who is the undisputed king of factory stock quarter-mile warfare in 1969, well, that honor, my friends, goes to the 1969 Plymouth Roadrunner A12. This wasn't just a wolf in sheep's clothing. This was a wolf in a meaner wolf's clothing. No fancy chrome, no creature comforts, just pure, unadulterated, get-out-of-my-way muscle. The A12 package took the already tough-as-nails Roadrunner and turned it into a factory-built street brawler. The magic started under that flat black, lift-off fiberglass hood, no hinges, just pure business. Beneath it sat a specially prepped 440 V8, topped with that glorious six-pack setup. 3 Holley 2-barrel carbs gulping down air and fuel, pushing out a conservatively rated 390 horsepower straight to the rear wheels. But this wasn't just a bigger carb setup. Plymouth borrowed some go-fast goodies from the Hemi parts bin, like its heavy-duty valve springs, flat-face tappets, and a hotter cam. Out back, it ran a stump-pulling 4.10 Dana 60 rear with a sure grip. The suspension was stiff, it sat on fat 15-inch Goodyear G70 polyglass tires, and its whole attitude just screamed, "Don't mess with me." The result? A quarter-mile time of a dead-flat 13.0 seconds. No tricks, no fancy advertising, just raw, unholy performance that humbled pretty much everything else in its era, if you had the guts to win that big motor out. It didn't make many, and today, an A12 Roadrunner is one of the most sought-after pieces of muscle car iron on the planet. But back then, it was the car that showed up to the stoplight drags and sent everyone else home crying to their mamas. 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1. The 1969 Camaro ZL1. Now, that was a whole different kettle of fish. To the average Joe on the street, it might have looked like a nicely optioned Camaro SS. But under the hood, it was packing a weapon of mass destruction straight from Chevy's racing program. The ZL1 was powered by an all-aluminum 427 cubic inch V8, an engine originally designed for the brutal Can-Am racing series. On paper, Chevy said it made 430 horsepower and 450 lb-ft of torque. But those numbers? Pure fiction, meant to keep the insurance folks calm. In reality, this thing was pumping out well over 500 horsepower. And because it was aluminum, it didn't weigh any more than a regular old small block V8. That meant better weight distribution, lightning-quick launches, and surprisingly good handling for such a beast. Chevy didn't skimp on the rest of it, either. The ZL1 came with sticky tires, a heavy-duty suspension, and a stout limited-slip rear, and everything you needed to try and tame that monster. On the strip, it could clock a mind-blowing 13.2 seconds in the quarter mile. Back in '69, that was knocking on supercar door. Only 69 ZL1 Camaros were ever built. They were crazy expensive, incredibly rare, and built for one thing: pure, unadulterated performance. But for the lucky few who knew what they were getting, the ZL1 wasn't just another Camaro. It was a rocket ship in disguise, a street-legal track car that could embarrass just about anything that dared to pull up alongside it. 1968 Shelby Mustang GT 500 KR. Let's kick this off with a real piece of Mustang royalty, one of the rarest and most respected ponies ever to wear the Shelby badge. The 1968 Shelby GT 500 KR. Only 1,571 of these magnificent beasts rolled out of the factory that year. And if you were lucky enough to lay eyes on one back then, you knew you were looking at something truly special. That KR stood for King of the Road. And let me tell you, that wasn't just some fancy marketing talk. It was a statement of fact. Under that scooped hood, this Shelby packed a 428 cubic inch Super Cobra Jet V8. Officially, they rated it at 335 horsepower and 440 pound-feet of torque. But us insiders? We knew those numbers were sandbagged, probably to keep the insurance adjusters from having heart attacks. This car had some serious bite. But the GT 500 KR wasn't just about straight-line grunt. Shelby made sure it could handle itself in the corners too, with staggered rear shocks to help tame will hop on hard launches and extra bracing in the suspension for better stability. The GT 500 KR was built to launch like a scalded cat and stay glued to the road. It could rip through the quarter mile in about 13.9 seconds, a mighty respectable number for the time. Sure, it might only be sitting at number 10 in this particular lineup, but when it comes to sheer style, pedigree, and commanding street presence, the 1968 GT 500 KR was pure American automotive aristocracy. 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4. Loud, proud, and built to snap necks, the 69 GTO Judge wasn't just another muscle car. It was Pontiac's crown jewel, their heavyweight champion. And when it came to pure, unadulterated, tire-shredding power, nothing in their lineup touched the top dog. The Judge equipped with the Ram Air 4 400 cubic inch V8. This wasn't just a big engine. It was a torque monster, officially cranking out 370 horsepower and a stump-pulling 445 pound-feet of twist. Pontiac backed it up with a heavy-duty 3-speed, hydromatic transmission that made launching off the line smooth and brutally effective, perfect for anybody who wanted to make their competition intimately familiar with their taillights. To keep all that power from just going up in smoke, the GTO Judge came with a SAF T-Track limited slip differential, because what good is all that muscle if you're just sitting there spinning your wheels? And if you're hoping to stay cool while piloting this beast, well, forget about it. That massive Ram Air 4 motor filled every square inch of the engine bay, leaving zero room for air conditioning. So yeah, you got plenty of heat, but it wasn't coming from the sun. It was coming from all that glorious horsepower rumbling right under the hood. 1969 Plymouth Barracuda 440. If you were a car-crazy kid, or even a grown-up gearhead back in 1969, you knew the Plymouth Barracuda had transformed from a kind of stylish compact into a serious street machine. And then, when they went and stuffed a fire-breathing 440 cubic inch V8 into that relatively small body, well, all bets were off. You're not going to believe this, but only 358 of these little monsters ever saw the light of day. That's it, just 358. And get this, the engines weren't even put in by Plymouth on their main assembly line. They farmed out the job to the conversion specialists at Hurst. Yeah, those guys, the ones who knew a thing or two about making cars go fast. The result? One of the most brutally effective Plymouths of the entire muscle car era. That 440 big block was factory rated at 375 horsepower, and when you mashed the go pedal, that CUDA could tear through the quarter mile in a blistering 13.8 seconds. Back in '69, that was lightning quick, especially for a car that, to the uninitiated, might not have looked like it belonged anywhere near a drag strip. It was a real sleeper if there ever was one. '69 Plymouth GTX Hemi. Alright, next on the hit parade is a real piece of Mopar muscle, the 1969 Plymouth GTX. And just like its bad boy cousin, the Dodge Charger R/T, this beauty could be had with the one, the only, the legendary 426 Hemi stuffed under the hood. We're talking 425 horsepower, dual 4-barrel carburetors, and enough torque to make the pavement ripple. But the GTX wasn't just about brute force. It had a bit of class, too. Plymouth engineers, they knew you couldn't just throw that much power into a car and call it a day. So, Hemi-equipped GTX models got their own special heavy-duty suspension setup, built specifically to handle the earth-shaking force of that big V8. Add in a sure grip limited slip differential, and all that power actually made it to the ground with some authority. So how fast was it? Try 13.5 seconds in the quarter mile. That's move-in, folks, especially for a car that still offered plenty of full-size comfort along with its muscle car attitude. And while the Charger seems to get a lot of the glory these days, here's a fun fact for you collectors. As of 2024, according to the Haggerty Price Guide, a 69 Hemi GTX is actually valued a little higher than a 69 Hemi Charger, around $217,000 for the GTX compared to $212,000 for the Charger. Just another reason the gentleman's muscle car, the GTX, earns its high spot in this countdown. 1969 Pontiac GTO Royal Bobcat. The 1969 Pontiac GTO was already a living legend on the streets, a real heavy hitter. But the guys over at Royal Pontiac in Royal Oak, Michigan, a dealership famous for wringing every last ounce of performance out of factory muscle, they wanted more. They took a stock GTO and gave it their now famous Royal Bobcat treatment. First thing they did was yank the factory 400 and drop in a bigger, meaner 428 cubic inch V8. Then, they went to work on the suspension, dialing it in both front and rear for harder launches and tighter cornering. Throw in a good old 4-speed manual transmission, and you had yourself a quarter-mile warrior capable of clicking off a 13.8-second pass. But here's the cool part, the real charm of the Bobcat. Royal didn't strip it out like a race car. The comfy original vinyl seats, the wood-grain dash, all that stuff stayed right where it was. This was a muscle car you could terrorize the strip with on Sunday, and then cruise down Main Street in style on Monday. Kind of an iron fist in a velvet glove. Understated on the outside, well, as understated as a GTO could be, but an absolute killer under the hood. The 1969 GTO Royal Bobcat was the kind of car that made other drivers get real nervous when you pulled up next to him at a red light. 1969 Hurst Olds 442. Back in 1969, Oldsmobile, often seen as the more grown-up GM division, decided to let its hair down and teamed up with the shifter king himself, George Hurst. Their mission? To take the already potent 442 and turn it into something truly legendary. The result was the 1969 Hurst Olds 442, a street-legal drag machine with a whole lot of class, a ton of attitude, and enough raw power to scare your passenger silly. Under that wild twin-scooped hood sat Oldsmobile's biggest, baddest engine ever, a massive 455 cubic inch V8, factory rated at 380 horsepower, though everyone knew it was making more, and a stump-pulling 500-pound-feet of torque. That monster was hooked up to a Hurst dual-gate shifted turbo hydromatic 400 transmission and a 3.23 rear axle with an anti-spin limited slip differential. This beast could launch like a rocket and run the quarter mile in a blistering 13.7 seconds. But the Hurst Olds wasn't just about raw speed. It was a head-turner from every angle. Dressed in a striking cameo white with fire frost gold accents, sporting that aggressive functional hood scoop and bold striping, it looked every bit as ferocious as it performed. With its limited production run and unforgettable style, the 1969 Hurst Olds 442 was one of the finest blends of executive class and pure, unadulterated muscle ever to roll out of Detroit. Well, there you have it, a trip down a very fast memory lane. Did your personal favorite make the cut? Drop a comment. Let us know your stories. We love hearing them. If this look back at the golden age of horsepower brought a smile to your face, be sure to stick around. And tell a buddy who still dreams in cubic inches about GoldDaysUSA. 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 GoldDaysUSA.